The Experiential Edge, the show about learning by doing in higher education, with your host, Trevor Finch.
Welcome to The Experiential Edge, the podcast for post-secondary instructors looking for ideas, answers, roadmaps to building better learning environments. I'm your host, Trevor Finch, and today we're going to talk about, I think it's one of the biggest gaps in higher ed. And you know, it's, some of us think it's effort, but I wouldn't say it is. It's actually iteration, right? I remember from when I used to teach that you'd be teaching something, you get them to do an assessment, they get a grade, and then you move on. And especially in a lot of courses now, moving away from large summative assessments like exams, whatever else, maybe they won't even touch on that again till perhaps a later course or when they move on. So learning really isn't like that, especially in the real world. Most of us, we don't just do something once, that's it, we move away unless, we really didn't care about it. The reality is if we're trying to get better at something, especially at our job, right, it happens, we get feedback and we adjust based on that and we try again, and often under pressure. So that iterative learning, right, repeating something over again with small changes and getting people to adjust what they do and see how it changes variables. That when we engage with that as educators, we move students from did I get it right to hey, what did I learn this time? So instead about the result, it's about the learning. So mistakes become data, right, not failure. That's where experiential learning comes in and why today's conversation really matters. All right, so I have a guest here. Svan Lembke, welcome. She's a professor at the Okanagan College School of Business. Her background is in management and consulting roles in some large organizations, including Deloitte and SAP. She is now taking her experience from technology, innovation, and business development into the Okanagan. So just to kind of explain why we're here is that, so my coworker Jaden had worked with Svan in terms of getting ours like Praxar simulation, running a course. And he actually was on site to kind of assist because Svan decided to do something a little bit different than how most people do. And I'm just going to preface this and I'm going to let Svan take over and tell a little bit of the story. But Jaden came in to a meeting and he said, oh my God, I have never seen a classroom more engaged, more excited ever. And this is a guy who was recently went through college and had a million classes and now was involved with it. And the story that unfolded was so wild. I said, okay, I got to speak to her. So Svan, welcome after that very long introduction. So maybe I'm going to hold back for a second and we're going to have that linger, this little wild classroom situation. So before you tell your story, I'm just going to ask you this. Now, you are someone who you were just telling me not long ago that you love iterative learning, right? Using iteration to teach. Why is that? What are the advantages that you see in those incremental changes and learning through mistakes and all those kind of things? Just give me that little bit of philosophy and then we'll get into what you did.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm glad to hear that feedback from Jaden. I was as excited as my students. It was the first time I tried this, so I got lucky. Yes, but I like iterative learning because repetition is what this is all about. I have a background in sales. And when you sell, you try to focus on the most important part of your value proposition. You tell people what you're going to sell them or what you want them to hear, and you tell them about it, and then you repeat it.
Yes.
So I do the same in the classroom.
And same thing if you worked in technology world. So anyone who works in technology understands that, and project management, right? Iteration, like making small improvements on what you did. So that's the world you come from. So it totally makes sense. Now, why is it so important? It's not just because the world reflects it, but what does it do differently than the usual way of here's a lecture, here's what it is?
So I haven't always been in education. I've only been in education for 10 years. So 20 years in business didn't necessarily prepare me for the classroom. I had a lot to learn, but I saw it as entertainment. I have to entertain my student. I need to their attention. And usually when you repeat things too often, you lose their attention.
Totally.
So you need to know what you hope you want to learn, that difference. So you need to keep it varied, but still focus on your learning outcomes.
Absolutely.
And I often try it in other classes with first asking them to research something, present in a kind of a a PowerPoint style, then I provide feedback, and I want that incorporated when they write a report about the same material.
Absolutely.
I also teach case method. So we agree on a process for analysis and then do it over and over again, but with very different cases where different factors matter that need to be considered. So it's an iteration with slight changes. And what I loved with the golf simulation that I used is that the teams competed against each other. So they
Mhm.
all changed their strategy. That doesn't mean so for me, that meant the moment a student or a team tried exactly the same thing, they wouldn't get the same result. So they needed to consider doing the analysis and adapt to that environment, which worked really well.
Now, I'm going to set the stage for anyone listening who's not familiar with haven't used simulations or even the practice of simulations. So typically, what happens is, and this is very similar to how a lot of classroom, if you're looking at not lesson planning, but you're looking at your course planning, your course outline, you scaffold, right? You teach one concept and another concept, and they all build on each other until you get to the end. And often that's how our simulations are used, and in fact, that's typically how they were designed, right? They were designed to be that you coincide and you give some time for reflection and all these kind of things. And I'm not going to say that the time frames are set, but that's often how they've been used and traditionally applied. So what a lot of instructors do is they'll take once a week, right? They'll simulate around, they'll give feedback, be some assessments, some different information, and of course, depending on the time, the structure of the course, that will vary by a great amount. And we give them a long launch pad often in terms of for the students to learn the simulation. So this is how you do this, and we give a little bit of feedback, and we go hoping that basically you have a little bit of a runway, right? So we get them building to the point where they become having a certain level of, I'm not going to say expertise, but they have competency within the simulation itself so that they can not worry so much about how to work the simulation and more about applying the concepts that they're learning every single week. Now, Sven, you turn this on its head. You didn't do it that way. Maybe just describe the process that you did, and then we can get into the why and the what of it.
I'd like to start by commenting on your statement about reflection. And I usually teach third and fourth year degree program classes.
Right.
And my students in the third and fourth year know how to reflect. Now, I'm teaching a first year for the first time myself, and I assume that these students don't understand how to learn, how to reflect. So I didn't make the assumption that that would happen.
Right.
And I still wanted them to figure it out themselves. I didn't want to hold their hand. I come from business. I wanted students to act like junior business people. And when you go into business, you don't have someone hold your hand. You might have a mentor that is your sounding board. And of course, you have a boss in most cases that should tell you what you're supposed to do. But a lot of the learning, you need to figure out yourself.
Absolutely.
So, but if you don't know how to reflect, it's a big ask.
That's right.
So I used the simulation really for multiple things. I wanted them to figure out how to use their group members, how to work in the group for decision making, because they had to make decisions. They had to apply a consistent strategy and figure that out themselves. They had to understand that it all changes if your environment changes. So that relative strategic positioning. And I know that doesn't apply to every year, but my students don't understand the control function. They don't really understand money. They are 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. They are still very young when it comes to money. And money is the financials in business are often not considered in that stage of their development. So there were so many things that I wanted. And I thought a simulation that only runs 1 year and then a week later, another year, doesn't show them what the effects are of what they did in 1 year. So they
Right.
needed to see it already over multiple years. So that's why I tried the first, give them 3 years and let them run wild and tell them it doesn't matter. This is for you to figure out what's going on.
And how much time did they have to make all the decisions for those first 3 years? For each year, how much time did you give them?
I only gave them 10 minutes for each year. Because I only had 40 minutes at the end of the class.
Exactly. Oh, you had shown that. Did you give them at least that? Did they know how to like move things around and check into the platform a bit, or were they pretty cold? What do you want?
Absolutely. Yeah. I did that the week before just to say, and next week, make sure you all bring your laptops and be ready for this. They already started with some of the quizzes, but I didn't put the pressure on by saying they had to complete it all. This was more of a trial round.
Yeah, and you emphasize that, right? You took some of the any kind of that the importance, the weight of this is for March. You took that away and just said just make as many decisions as you can, then let's see what happens, right?
Admittedly, though, I teach a week on business strategy. I teach a week on decision making, teamwork, and I always use golf and the golf industry and maybe multi business operations where you also run a restaurant and sell something, a retail store. We discussed that before. Yeah, we talked about Kelowna golf clubs or golf courses and how they are managed.
So that's not like they're thrown into the wolves. But the reality is that all that prep cuts to the point. But when it comes to making decisions, there's I can't remember, it's a dozen, 15 or so major decisions that they have to make among several different areas. Typically, a first class that would use the simulation, the groups would take often up to an hour and a half of analyzing reports, data, conferring with each other, going back and forth, looking at some of the tools that are like, we've got estimated budget tools. So that's kind of like some of those formative assessments. They can literally go through and say, okay, does this work? What's going to happen? So they can kind of see the effects. So it's that mini iteration, but not really. And so they really pour through it. But you said, heck no, you got 10 minutes. And did you do you did the three like back to back to back? Yeah. And then you did the reflection.
So I gave them only 10 minutes and they couldn't even finish all the decisions.
Of course.
And it didn't matter. It was to learn the technology.
Yeah.
Not just my students. Remember, this is the first time I'm running
That's
the
right.
simulation. And one of the things any professor is a bit worried about is what's going to happen. Will the technology work? Will I be able to answer the questions that my students ask? And so on. So I wanted that for me as well,
Yeah.
as much as for my students. So yeah, it was all fairly relaxed and they thought it was fun. And I said, you are there to try things.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually don't think about winning. Think about trying things. And that's what they did.
Now, what about the students who, there are people there, I know I've had many students and there were times where I myself was like super competitive, right? So there is those natural ones. So the super competitive ones are going to want to win, but that doesn't matter. That's the point when you have such little time, it's hard to be competitive. You have to learn, like you basically almost force that competitive variable out because you're just simply limiting it to the point, at least in the first round, they just got to learn.
Competition is linked to feeling in control.
Right.
And I actually build the control that they felt that they could actually win. So going through this, it actually revved up their interest and competitiveness, not in this round. They were starting to do trash talking about the future round.
That's right. But that first round, it's hard to be competitive when you're just trying to figure out what the heck's going on. So you took that pressure out.
Well, they also have an attention span that's built through TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you said that most people give their students like an hour or longer for the first round, there would be 2 students or 1 student per team that really does the thinking, and the others would be playing on their mobile devices, doing something else. So with 10 minutes, they very quickly realized that this is a thing about delegation. So group decision making was one of my key criteria that I wanted them to learn. And with that, they needed to have a playbook that everybody knew because they couldn't fit all the questions into 10 minutes. If one person did it, that was impossible. They needed to learn that delegation is the name of the game.
Now, did you see that difference even in those first 3 practice rounds?
No.
Or did that come later?
That came the next week when they redid it.
Okay. So they did the 3 and then a week later. And in between that week, what did you focus on? Or you just let them kind of figure out how are they going to approach that next, the real rounds, right? The ones that are when the game was live.
I only see them once a week. So what I made sure is that they had access, that I didn't roll over or wipe what they had done. They knew that they would have time until Sunday to actually look through their decisions and to decide next time we'll do this better.
Perfect.
Yeah,
So then the next week, they basically repeated it with a different time frame, a different fashion, correct?
not really. Because remember, they had the whole week to prepare. This is longer than an hour. Yeah, because we wiped it all. The thing is, when you have 1 week after another, and I don't know about the other simulations, but the golf course management is really, unless you decide to expand your golf course, like have a lot more holes, not just a 918 hole, you're left behind because the size of your golf course determines your foot traffic.
Yes.
And you can only have so many people on the golf course, and they wouldn't really come just to the restaurant unless that is part of the environment. So the students that didn't expand the golf course, it would be impossible to almost catch up after 3 years.
Right.
Yeah, this sets the foundation. But what I found is that in the first week with the rapid 3 rounds, my students actually did better in the first 2 years than they did in the second week. So for me, I learned with them. Yeah, I
Yes.
realized that if in the first week, they weren't prepared. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't finish all the decisions. Yeah. I mean, we all laughed about it later on. But they couldn't spend that much money because they couldn't make that many decisions.
That's
So,
right.
so they actually were reasonable in their expenses. Whereas the next week, they were just fast in buying and doing everything. Still, no strategy. We go for everything. We do super luxury. And they all went bust, or most of them went bust. So
Funny.
they had ideas, but that then opened the door for me. Remember, I'm learning at the same time.
Yes.
I hadn't done this before either, but I suddenly thought they hadn't even looked at all the financial statements that the simulation produces. Now,
Yes.
they are first years. They would never be able to put together an income statement and then analyze it, but they get it through the simulation.
Right.
So then I am able to show them their own income statements and the interest that that generates because that's their company, and to talk about their relative positioning. So
Yes.
there are one map, the positioning map, I would actually like to have expanded in the simulation.
Note to our programmers. Yes. Note to the programmers. Exactly.
So then they're looking for their company. They're looking for their business. Yeah. And we're then talking, so who's your closest competitor? And they're like, oh, that's you guys over there. You did that. And I'm like, so how did they steal your market share? And then they are understanding how that happened, and the trash talk that goes along with this. I'm pretty sure from what they were saying, they were all in chat rooms telling how they are going to kind of take all their customers in the following week. Yeah. So, yeah, it was super fun. So, that group decision making, consistency in their own strategy, that market positioning, understanding the environment, and of course, finally, that there are control functions, yeah, and how to use them. These were my 4 takeaways. This is what I could do week over week. And every week was different because all the groups adjusted, but they realized they needed to adjust consistently and just double check that it's all working. I loved it.
It sounds like it, and it sounds like the students did, and I know Jaden did as well. It sounds like it was wild. Now, obviously, this worked out really well. If you're going to do this again, right? So if you're going to teach in the first year course, what would you change? What would you do differently?
So I am actually scheduled to teach that course again because I asked for it in the fall.
Great.
So I would like to add one more iterative week. So I'll start a week earlier. So not just doing this. So I did iteration for 3 weeks and then I ran it for real,
Gotcha.
full grading as well. And I added more years. So they were fairly fast because they had already planned what they do. And it takes a while, like in business, it takes a while for some of their decisions to have an effect. Yeah.
You're financing, you're making changes. Those in just like in business, it takes time, right? And you have to pay off development costs, investments. That takes time, and then next, you're flush. That reflects the real world,
Yes. And they knew that I would only give them 6 years.
right?
Because if I give them 9 years, these are young business minds. They think they are planning for the end of the world. Yeah. And they have so much time to recover. I don't want them to think that they don't actually need to produce the goods at some stage.
Right.
So they really needed to focus to get out of the financial position they are in. And first year, they are actually, the golf course is not in a good position.
Right.
None of them are, because they all start the same way. And then they decide, okay, how are we going to differentiate in the market? How are we going to outperform the competition? And not everyone, you then know who's your direct competition, what are they doing, and how are we appealing to the right kind of customer, and are we price competitive?
That's right. So Svan, this was planned, right? With in terms of how you're going to do it, and Jane executed that. We did a little extra help, but we're always happy to do that. So I know that he went above and beyond to make sure that you were getting everything that you needed, and that. So we make some tweaks. So it's not the easiest thing just not automatic. Like you can't just set these settings. We had some. We had to have a little hand in there, but I think it's awesome. I think that what you had learned from this, especially with the simulation. But if there's an instructor out there who's thinking, "Hey, I want to take this idea, whether it's with a simulation or something else, how do I take this rapid type of iterative learning? What will be a way that I could apply that?"
First of all, play with it. Think about it as a learning and entertainment tool, not as this is the core of all my teaching, and I want to also have it to evaluate my students. Then it becomes an overwhelming method, and it's just that simulation. I used it as a sideshow, and it became a very valuable learning tool. But I didn't start off with high expectations. So I always think if you try something new, go in with a pinch of realism. Let's see what
Absolutely.
happens. Because it chills you. I remember we had one situation because I didn't have the best Wi-Fi bandwidth at the time, and the system just kind of hung and stalled. And of course, all my students said, if it stops now, are we going to get all full points? And I said, absolutely. Let's just take a break. And then after the break, it was back. So you want to take some of the technical concerns
Yeah.
away. So that would be my first recommendation. So use it as a learning tool and see what happens. Don't schedule the whole class around it. Yeah. And give it a few years. Don't just do 1 year a week hoping that students will learn and reflect, because it's really difficult to recover after year 3 when you've run the business into the ground because you were too late with some of the things that you needed to do, or you were inconsistent in your strategy. To recover is in business would be as well.
It's very difficult without help. That's usually when companies go and say, "Hey, let's get some financing. We get a partner or we sell." Right? When you think about, so it's that approach, right? Is that going in with the right mindset that you play with it, give yourself that opportunity. It also learning with the students is not a bad thing. I used to do it quite a few times. It sounds like you had as fun and as interesting and as strong of a learning experience as they did.
Some of my colleagues are concerned that students are trying to game the system. And if they use it like a game, I'm actually not that concerned because they still need to learn to win. And business is a game.
It is.
Yeah. So I'm not concerned if they they tell me that, but after 6 years, so in the last year, I'm not investing. I'm like, okay, let's see what you would sell off and what you would use the money for to make the company look good. So let's check this out. And they tried. Some tried to just make the books look good. And some did it right, and some got the timing wrong. And again, great learning.
I think it's a good reminder that not to be scared of trying something new, right? And that doing it in that sort of let's all just learn together, let's just do it, takes a lot of the pressure off us as instructors, because I know even when I was teaching and I took on something new, it was like, oh, do I really want to add this? It becomes a burden, right? And we're thinking, why do I have to do this? If it's forced on you because it's part of the curriculum, or you're just trying to decide, you can always open those doors to your own mind just by playing around with it. There's nothing wrong with that. And as long as you're open, right? Were you transparent with the students?
They knew I hadn't taught this course before. So I said to them, this is first time I'm teaching a first year class, and help me learn. And I didn't know what to expect with a first year class. And we used to joke that some of my colleagues says, they are not potty trained. And I'm like, oh my God, what can I do with them? So I was super impressed. It always also depends. Every year, every class has a different composition of students and personalities.
Yes.
And I lucked out. Yeah, I had some real characters in this class. I let them decide. They told me how they wanted to put the students together into groups. So, and I had a balance in gender and in backgrounds and in ethnicity as much as possible. And I had a group of 40 students. So I had a lot to choose from, which was fantastic.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So, well, we're going to wrap it up here. I really appreciate your time today. I could talk about this forever. There's so many great insights. I want to thank Svan for her time today and, sharing that. And I love that you're honest about it. Just saying, hey, this is something I was trying. I want to try it new. And it worked in this way. And it's something that we can do again. And I hope that people listening will be kind of inspired to say, let's try something new, and let's not be afraid to try something new, but let's also all of us learn together and use that rapid fire as a Kickstarter. And I think it's a great way to do it. So thanks again for that. And I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode, and stay on the edge, people.
You've been listening to the Experiential Edge. For more tips, tricks, and ideas from this episode, go to experientialedgepod.com.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.